Nintendo Switch was a runaway success. However, after 8 years, it's time to usher in the successor. But one has to consider how Nintendo have kind of shot themselves in the foot with revealing the damn thing. It's a sad state of affairs when third-party companies are leaking renders of your product. There's also the fact Nintendo have historically flubbed it after success. Just look at how badly they dropped the ball after the Wii. That's the type of situation Nintendo now faces. They're so damn inept at following up on success, they're like the stick in a bike wheel meme. But at least they're successful, unlike Microsoft. If finishing in third place was an Olympic sport, they'd take home the gold medal every goddamn generation. But here are the reasons I think the Switch 2 is doomed to fail. I know this video is going to catch me some heat, and I welcome it. As much as I love the Nintendo fans in my community, your average one has a chip on their shoulder bigger than mine. Which is impressive when you consider that chip was what I built my personality around for the longest fucking time. But know this, console manufacturers aren't your friends. They're here to make money. If you think otherwise, you need help. But we aren't here to talk about how your life derailed long ago. We're here to talk about Nintendo bungling the announcement of the Switch 2. Now, according to people who are far more in the Nintendo camp than I'll ever be, the Switch 2 was supposed to be announced sometime last year. But thanks to internal issues, Nintendo just didn't do that, which has caused them a ton of problems leading up to this announcement, which at the time of recording happened earlier this week. They only unveiled the hardware, which, okay, that's how Nintendo operates, and generally speaking, that's how consoles are announced in this day and age. If we're lucky, we might see one or two pieces of software, the main selling point of these machines. But as I alluded to earlier, Nintendo has kind of dropped the ball with announcing this console repeatedly. Genki showed off 3D models of what the new system looks like, and Nintendo went into damage control. That's already a bad sign of things to come, if you ask me. There's also the fact accessory manufacturers are now rather pissed off with Nintendo as well. If this is how things are going to be with third parties making accessories, how do you think things are going to go with third-party developers? Nintendo as a whole is mega protective of their brand. So it was kind of weird, they were mega hands-off, for the most part, when it came to the content published by third parties on the Switch. However, that has seemingly changed in the last handful of months, as some games have been censored, or haven't been released at all, as they were refused classification, which is much more in line with how Nintendo operated between the SNES through to the Wii U. Nintendo was always where you went for family-friendly content and not just some cheap thrills smutty title where middle-aged men could oogle anime titties. Clearly, Nintendo wants to feel like a big boy with some element of control, but pissing off manufacturers is just one of the ways they've bungled things, so subscribe if you've made it to this point in the video. Also, how else has Nintendo cocked this up? Look, when it comes to information, there are worse ways of doing it than piecemeal. However, Nintendo has been rather poor at giving gamers the information they'd like. I could speculate the how and why Nintendo have done things this way, but that would all be hearsay. Though my one theory as to why they've been keeping mum over the Switch 2 comes down to them holding out hope the original system can outsell the PlayStation 2. As of right now, the original Switch sits in third place behind only the original DS and the PS2. I very much doubt the Switch is going to surpass the 160 million set by the PS2. However, I do believe it will beat the DS as it's within shouting distance of that system, which moved over 154 million consoles. So I believe that was part of why Nintendo have delayed giving the consumer any information regarding the Switch 2 except for little things here and there, such as the console being backwards compatible, which was revealed in early November. After which, they were silent until January 16th, which makes sense, since it seems the original plan was to wait for late February to early March to unveil the hardware. given we won't see the actual games for the system until April 2nd, which also indicates Nintendo is planning a summer release window, which is interesting when you consider the original Switch came out in early spring. This allowed the system to build momentum through 2 seasons before the real holiday push. In doing so, Nintendo helped drive some hype for its hybrid system, as the summer used to be a bit of a dead zone when it came to releases. I'd argue it still is, generally speaking. So this might actually help the Switch 2 in some ways if Nintendo is able to build up a strong enough launch library, something most consoles don't have the benefit of. I know I'm definitely not getting my hopes up in regards to this one. However, given Nintendo have made overtures to more third-party developers in recent times, there's a possibility the Switch 2 does get a strong first year, and I end up eating crow. But you have to admit, showing off the hardware and only a small snippet of a new Mario Kart title isn't the strongest position for Nintendo to announce the system from, especially when leaks force them to show the console off far earlier than intended. Had they been able to stick to the original plan of showing it off sometime in late February to early March, they could have really driven hype for the Switch 2 Direct in early April. This one is a reason I'll admit is probably going to be proven wrong, given how Nintendo does things. But as of right now, the Switch 2 just seems like a larger version of its predecessor with slightly prettier graphics. As of right now, it seems like the new system is going to lack a new gimmick. This has kind of been Nintendo's thing since shifting their style when the GameCube failed. Don't believe me, because you're too young to remember that era? Well, the GameCube was at one point selling for $50 at Walmart, which was pretty much around the same cost of a PlayStation 2 title. Okay, so the GameCube was an abject failure, followed by the really successful Wii, which won the 7th generation of hardware. How did the Wii U do? Terribly, if you must know. Over the course of 5 years, it only managed to sell around 13.56 million consoles. This was because of many factors, one of them being Nintendo failed to market it properly. At launch, a lot of people, mostly uninformed consumers, thought it was just a very expensive peripheral for the original Wii. Thankfully, this will not be an issue the Switch 2 will have to face, as the 2 in the name clearly denotes a new system. However, it would seem Nintendo is going for a more iterative console so far. The Wii had the motion controls. The Wii U had the ability to make its controller a second screen akin to the DS, and a very rudimentary take on making the system portable. The Switch then doubled down on the portability aspect, in a time where handheld consoles were thought dead. But this brings us to something many gamers are questioning. What will the Switch 2's actual gimmick be? We already know it'll be portable, like its predecessor. We also have seen the Joy-Cons can be used like a mouse apparently. That's all well and good, but it doesn't indicate what a potential gimmick might be. Seeing as Nintendo have become kind of the gimmick console, it's kind of a double-edged sword for the company. Its fanboys will buy into it no matter how bad the idea actually is, and hardcore gamers will either find excuses to dunk on it just because they dislike Nintendo, or because the gimmick is actually bad. Not communicating this at the hardware reveal is kind of a bad thing in my eyes. Now, I have absolutely no issue with Nintendo taking a page out of Microsoft's and Sony's books and making a more iterative console. In fact, I think that's probably the best move, especially if the price increase from the original Switch is only a marginal one. But for a lot of people, they want to know the gimmick of a Nintendo console before they buy in, and the best time to have driven hype for that would have been during the hardware reveal. Again, this particular point is likely to age like milk, as Nintendo probably reveals that information in April when outlets and select creators begin getting hands-on with the system. I know this is yet another point that could age poorly, and I'll be happy if it does. However, one of my concerns is the system will lack a killer IP at launch. This is a problem 99% of consoles face. Usually the launch window is weak as hell. This has been especially prevalent since the PS4 era, Mostly this is thanks to development time now taking way longer than it used to do, despite systems now being easier to program for as exotic architecture is becoming less of a thing. Up until the 8th generation of hardware, games could be developed between 1 to 2 years on average, with 3 to 4 typically being outliers. This was partially because games were operating on simpler design philosophies, but given how Nintendo tends to tightly control who has access to development kits, we might start to run into problems. Unless the studio is a first or second party one, then chances of them having a Switch 2 dev kit early enough to release a launch window game become significantly thinner. Couple that with Nintendo typically wanting to space their first party games out so they can breathe, and we might see a relatively light launch window. The 9th generation, which the Switch 2 is properly competing against, had light launches, and some would argue have weak libraries because of cross-generational support lasting into the supposed mid-generation timeframe. While Sony has stated we're at the midway point for the PS5's lifecycle, I just don't buy it. There was very little reason to release a Pro version, as the base console was plenty powerful enough as is. Plus, the PS4 is still getting games 5 years after it should have been sunset. This was thanks to a myriad of reasons, though. Namely, the chip shortages thanks to the pandemic meant actually acquiring a PS5 was pretty much an impossibility. Plus, during the earliest days of the system, people were more than likely holding off on buying a shiny new console, thanks to the looming threat of losing their jobs. Then, in the immediate aftermath of lockdowns being lifted, there was a recession thanks to people spending less money as a whole. Supposedly, we won't have shortages for the Switch 2. However, Nintendo said the same thing with the original console, and look how that turned out. It was really hard to get one until a year or so after the console launched. This was thanks to the chip shortage for Switch hardware, coupled with rather conservative sales expectations from Nintendo after the Wii U bombing. Couple that with people currently being a bit hesitant to make big-time purchases, and the Switch 2 may have a slower start than Nintendo expects. If that's the case, not only will gamers be less likely to adopt the new system, but developers will be as well. Admittedly, this isn't a foregone conclusion, but it's a distinct possibility and one Nintendo will have to navigate carefully if they want the Switch 2 to be a success. This next point is one I alluded to earlier in the video. We don't know how much it's going to cost the consumer. Gamers are a fickle bunch, especially when it comes to price point. Just look at how many balked over the eye-watering cost of the PlayStation 5 Pro. While premium home consoles aren't a new concept, it's starting to be a questionable purchase when a better PC can be built for the same price or cheaper. There's a reason luxury consoles, like SNK's Neo Geo AES, have sold relatively poorly. The PS4 Pro, which was actually required thanks to the increased demands of games late into that system's lifecycle, merely equated to around 1/4 of the PS4's lifetime sales, with slim and fat models taking up the lion's share. Well, it's very unlikely Nintendo will price the Switch 2 above $400 USD, it's also a possibility it will be higher than that, which would cause a lot of families and many preteens and teenagers to balk at the console, which would be a bad thing for Nintendo as a whole, given they're the family-conscious brand, and a lot of the reason they have a fanbase that skews far younger than PlayStation and Xbox, besides the types of experiences found on these consoles, is because of the lower price point. But not knowing the price point at present is going to be a detractor for many. Maybe I'll be eating my words come April and I'll be pleasantly surprised. But I'm also expecting this console is going to be a sticker shock for many, especially if my next prediction holds true. I know this one is going to ruffle some feathers from the "it's not about the graphics, it's about the games" crowd. However, from the bit of footage we do have of the new Mario Kart game, it doesn't look like a significant step up in terms of graphics. Now, I know Nintendo haven't been known as a graphical powerhouse since the GameCube days, but that's not really the point I'm making here. My main issue is, At this point in time, the Switch is an underpowered potato, and it was even so at launch. Hell, even the much more powerful PlayStation 4 and Xbox One were proving underpowered come 2017. But one of my main concerns is regarding the power of this system. If it's not a significant bump up, then Nintendo will find themselves in the same predicament they currently face. An underpowered system requiring developers to make significant compromises just to get their games running. Am I expecting the Switch 2 will compete with the Xbox Series consoles or the PS5 in terms of power? No, I'm not. But I am expecting it to at least be comparable to the PS4 Pro, or a little bit below that, as that would make it at least a relatively competent console, though knowing Nintendo and how they do things their own way, I don't expect it to reach even that, making it feel more like the Super Switch many people were calling for around 3 years ago. Which, given we've shifted to a mid-cycle refresh that has better specs, I wouldn't be surprised if Nintendo uses the Switch 2 as a testbed to see if a Pro model works with their consumer base, which would likely bring its specs into line with what they should have been. This is a wait-and-see aspect, and it's one I'm feeling a little pessimistic about. So, those were the 6 reasons I think the Switch 2 is going to fail.
You're welcome!
If you've got some thoughts, I know I'm going to hear about them in the comments section, so I'll see you there. Thanks go out to my current channel members, R. Campbell and Dani Boy. If you'd like early access to most of my content, then click the join button or the link in the description. Now watch one of my other videos, and until next time, keep blazing that trail.